Hi everybody, I'm Jim. This is Great Books, Big Ideas. Welcome to the channel. Well, as I said in my last video, I finished the year one reading plan from Great Books of the Western World, second edition. And what I'd like to do is a recap of the reading list and just some off-the-cuff remarks about my memories of reading these books, the connections I made between some of the books, and any threads that I see in the year one list. The makers of this list, the editors, did, I think, a pretty effective job at stringing together a set of readings that were like a good way to start the 10-year plan. And also, they put books in conversation with one another. That's the whole idea behind these great book sets, is we get thinkers spanning the ages, communicating back and forth with one another in dialogue, what they call the great conversation. So I'm going to do a recap of that, and then we'll do a preview of year two coming right up on Great Books, Big Ideas. Okay, so from this Great Conversations volume, we're going to look at the first year list, and we'll just do a rundown. As I said before, it took me a year and a half to get through the list, because these aren't the only books I read, and it's not a race, right? It's just we take these at our own pace, and you're coming at these videos from all across time and space, and you might only be interested in some videos from this playlist and not others. I doubt there's a lot of people just kind of following the program, marching forth one after another, and you can go at your own pace. But anyway, year one started with Plato's Apology and Crito. And I actually did a series of videos to start this playlist. And these were based on lectures I had given when I taught the Apology at college. I really went on a deep dive into Apology and Crito. It's a good way to start the great conversation, because Socrates was indicted and convicted basically for having opinions that the state of Athens didn't like. And he instead of accepting banishment, exile as a punishment, he was given the hemlock. He chose to go, he didn't want to escape. That's what the Crito is all about. He refused to do that. And he just accepted his punishment, which was death. And he drank the hemlock, and the rest is history. Next up was a complete flip. We stayed with the ancient Greeks, who did Aristophanes, The Clouds, and Lysistrata, two phenomenal comedies by Aristophanes. The Clouds is really portraying Socrates as a bit of a intellectual clown. And we have a lot in there about sophistry and deception, and just a lot of bamboozling, and there's all kinds of antics going on. It's a very, very funny play. Lysistrata is very much a play about women's rights. They go on a sex strike. The women of Athens and the women of Sparta, they go on a sex strike in order to bring the men to heel and get them to stop warring against one another. Another just classic comedy. Then we moved back to Plato, one of the great heavy hitters in ancient Greek thought, and read books 1 and 2 from the Republic. I don't remember exactly what those covered. I know we did the Ring of Gyges in episode, so to start talk about justice and kind of setting some of these like core ideas on the table. And then Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, book 1, which is sort of launching into the fundamentals of Aristotle's virtue ethics. Then we also read Politics, book 1 from Aristotle, which starts, now you're starting to be able to relate things to one another, so you can kind of compare Aristotle on politics versus Plato in the Republic, some of the things he has to say about politics. And politics is a running theme throughout the year one list. Then we read various lives of the noble Grecians and Romans by Plutarch, Lycurgus, who was the ancient lawgiver from Sparta. Numa Pompilius. I remember this one pretty vividly because when I first read Plutarch, I didn't pay much attention to Numa the first time through, but I really appreciated the foundational role Numa played in Roman the founding of Rome, Roman laws, Roman customs, and the calendar and all that. Like, that was a really interesting life. Then the little comparison essay that Plutarch wrote between those two, and then finally the lives of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, both dynamic military leaders who invite comparison. Then we moved on to the New Testament, reading the Gospel according to St. Matthew, which was fun to revisit that one. And what struck me about that was just what a outstanding figure Jesus was, and like, it's sort of sublime and someone you could connect to, but also someone who's like sort of frightening in his brilliance and his power and the hold that he has over people. And of course, there's a lot in that book about the miracle working and so forth. A person who really was different. Yeah, and then also Matthew connecting the Old Testament prophecies and showing how Jesus, in Matthew's estimation, was the fulfillment of those prophecies. Of course, the famous Sermon on the Mount is in there as well. And then the Acts of the Apostles, which is about early Christian history. I had not read that in forever. So it was great to kind of get back into this. And now you're starting to see some historical continuities and threads where this Christianity, early Christianity, is sort of intellectually invading the ancient world. And on the missionary trips that Paul and others are taking, they are spreading the word out of the Near East into the Eastern Mediterranean and eventually over to Rome, what will then be known as the West. And you're starting to feel a sea change in thinking about. And one of the most memorable things I can recall about Acts was when Paul went, I think it was Paul went to Athens, and he's kind of like directly confronting like the old with the new. I hope I'm getting these details right. It's been a while since we covered these early ones. Then books 1 through 8 of the Confessions by St. Augustine. That was fun to revisit. And I ended up reading the entire book again. Augustine is really, I see him as the first autobiographer in Western tradition. That may not be literally true, but famously so, I think it is true. Like, he's the one that is known for spiritual autobiography, like the personality, the intimacy, the honesty, the candor that he writes with it really stood out as being something new. And then we jumped way forward in time, hundreds of years, to the Renaissance and Machiavelli's The Prince. And this is a short book. We read the whole thing. I was less impressed with The Prince on this reread than I was on earlier reads of it. I'm not exactly sure why. I think it felt a little bit like he was sucking up to his benefactors who were maybe the intended audience for this. And I didn't completely trust what Machiavelli was saying. The end justifies the means and all that. He gets a bad rap for that. I don't think he was a bad dude that some people might think he is. But by the same token, the examples that he pulls were very selective. And I also felt like he's a little bit trapped in his time and place. So if you're looking, a lot of ways that I read these books as I think about, how much of this transfers into our current day and how does it make us think anew about what's going on in our lives. And you can certainly see, that tyrants and, quote, princes are still, like, many examples widely available across the geopolitical landscape, no doubt. But by the same token, some of this felt a little crusty and a little bit like out of step with the current realities. You can't fault Machiavelli for that, but it's just something that I noticed in my own reactions to it. Then books 1 and 2 of Gargantua and Pantagruel by Rabelais, the French Renaissance writer. Boy, what a hoot that was. It's just such a trip. Very, very funny stuff. I like the thread of comedy that you move from Aristophanes, which was our second author we read, up until now Rabelais. So there is this sort of subtext of comedy that's like underpinning all this lofty, serious thinking going on. It's a great send-up of the church, of Renaissance ideas, intellectuals, you name it. Like no one really gets away from Rabelais's aim. And then a healthy selection of essays by the great French Renaissance writer Montaigne. And these were just great to revisit for me, another reread. And I see a lot of connections between St. Augustine and Montaigne. You know, these are just giant thinkers who aren't afraid to get personal and to really be self-effacing and to be just honest about who they are, how they think. Montaigne has a reputation of being a skeptic. He kind of considers everything, all possibilities. His essays tend to be kind of like sprawling, wandering, not always super well organized, but eventually they coagulate, you know, around a theme. And you know, some of my favorite essays here were the one on cannibals, and that the taste of good and evil depends in large part on the opinion we have of them. He's just such a healthy, refreshing spirit, Montaigne. I always think of him as a literary friend. Then next up was the great British Renaissance dramatist Shakespeare. William Shakespeare, Hamlet. You can't go wrong with Hamlet. I loved rereading it. It had been many years since I read the play, and I just drank that up. Hamlet, I think, is a Renaissance man, and he's also a very Montaigne-like figure. So it was interesting that they followed up the Montaigne reading with Hamlet. I think I know why they did that. So, you know, Hamlet has a lot of skepticism, and it has like tragic outcomes in that play. But he's very much on that pivot point, moving out of the Middle Ages through the Renaissance into the modern age. And, you know, he almost knows too much for his own good. You could also connect Hamlet to Gargantua and Pantagruel, I think. Then we moved on. The next set of readings, they all start to now connect up as you're getting into the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason. We had John Locke concerning civil government, second essay. I'd never read that before, so it was nice to read it for the first time. And that's sort of laying the foundation for like social contract theory and a lot of the principles that guided the American Revolution. And then The Social Contract by Rousseau builds on that. Rousseau's got a slightly different take on the social contract than Locke has, so you really have to compare and contrast those two. And then 2 chapters from Gibbon's the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. So now we're reaching backward in time again, back to Roman era. But this is really about the rise of Christianity. And there's so much informative stuff in those chapters. And you start to reinterpret like what St. Augustine was up to in light of how Gibbon interprets the rise of Christianity. Gibbon is a bit of a skeptic, a bit of a critic of early Christianity. You know, he's a man of reason, and I don't know exactly what his religious persuasion was, but he strikes me as being a lot more secular. As we move through the history in these sets, you start to move from the ancient world through the medieval Christianity, and then you get into the Renaissance and the modern age. It's increasingly skeptical and increasingly secular view on things. And now it's being applied to historical consciousness. What a great writer Gibbon is, too. Great stylist for his age. And then we read the state papers from the United States government, Declaration of Independence, Constitution, and some Federalist papers by Hamilton, Jay, and Madison. I had not really read much of the Federalists at all before, and I was a little bit let down by those readings. So the things that they say, it's like I kind of know them already. It's like, some of the stuff gets drilled into you when you take history and civics and political science classes. But, as an American, it's just kind of like you sort of know a lot of this stuff already. The Federalists were the defenders of the Constitution. They were trying to see it through to ratification. But I was viewing, again, from my contemporary point of view, looking backward, I was similar to how I was seeing Machiavelli as somewhat limited in his applicability to now. I feel that way a little bit, like some of these ideas that the Federalists were talking about may have been fine and dandy for their own age, but now they're sort of thin and brittle and rusting, and maybe we need to rethink the forms of government for our modern age. But I'm glad to kind of get into dialogue with the Federalists on that. And then Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, Introduction through Book 1, Chapter 9. I was a little bit not sure if I was going to like Adam Smith that much. He's like the father of mercantile capitalism, major theorist, political economy. And it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I guess I'll just put it that way. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. His writing style is certainly dry at times, but other passages were lively, some interesting, well-described examples, and some really foundational ideas, like things about the division of labor, especially. And there was more of a class consciousness in Adam Smith than I expected there to be. He's not necessarily the apologist for capitalism that you might think he is. At least that was my impression. I haven't read the whole thing yet, but what I got exposed to through this reading list made me think that. Then de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, Volume 1, Part 2, Chapter 6 through 8. This was fun reading too. I think I enjoyed de Tocqueville more than I thought I was going to. And this was all first time through de Tocqueville. I want to read the whole book at some point. But critical of democracy and yet in America, and also praising democracy in America. And his, he had a lot of firsthand observations, and he's kind of carrying through the history of the French Revolution and what was going on in France in the 19th century, which he was involved with. So he's kind of applying what's happening in America to what did happen in France, what could happen in France. A lot of comparisons between the old world and the new world, but it's a very lively mind, and it was a pretty refreshing 3 chapters to read. Then I reread Marx and Engels' Manifesto of the Communist Party. I've read this a few times, and it's a great political pamphlet. It's also, I think, cuts corners. It doesn't get into the depth of detail that other works by Marx get into. It paints things with a broad brush. There's a lot of heavy-duty argument going on, and it's a pamphlet. It's written to agitate the working classes to revolt, to unite and revolt. So it's got an edge to it. And a lot of Marx's moral fervor comes to the fore. You can tell he was really passionate about these ideas of historical materialism, class war, and the inevitability, I might say, although that's a loaded term, but the fact that the proletariat is now in line to take the next step in historical development and seize the means of production and take over from the bourgeoisie. And also, I remember there were some controversial ideas in here about the sort of base superstructure model of Marxism, where the economic foundations of society are the base, and they basically influence all the laws, customs, culture, ideas of the society that they underpin. And that's a very debatable subject. It's complicated. And there was more of that in the manifesto than I had remembered. I guess I was more tuned into that frequency this time. And then wrapping up the list, we have The Master Builder, a play by Henrik Ibsen, which was so great to reread again. I really, really enjoyed it. And I recommend you watch that Criterion Collection film starring Wallace Shawn called, I think it's called A Master Builder. Interesting new take on the play, but I think was faithful to the spirit of the original. This is about an architect who's sort of got a big ego, and he's getting older, and he's paranoid, and he's then visited by this girl from his past who he hardly remembers, but she has this clear memory of him making a promise that he's going to build like a castle, a kingdom for her, the princess, and he even kissed her, and now she's come back 10 years later to sort of make him fulfill his vow, which he does, and with some tragic consequences. But it's a film, not a film, a play that sort of seems realistic, but I think it's more symbolic than realistic. So it kind of plays with that blurry line between the two. And of all the readings, I feel like that was the one that maybe I have the hardest time sort of fitting into a scheme in comparing it to other works. And then finally, What is Life by Schrodinger, which is 20th century physicist. It's his take on biology and the sort of foundations of life and the laws of nature. And it ends in a sort of spiritual Eastern Vedantic kind of tradition mode. So it's funny that like the last reading in this list kind of like takes you out of the West and into the East, which is, frankly, that's kind of nice to see. But another reading that I think kind of stands apart from the other readings in the list. So what are some of the major themes that I see in year one? Well, I think you get set up with this, the Apology and Crito kind of get you into like the reasons why we want to read these books and think about things, like the love of philosophy, the love of study, and figuring out what's true, what's real, what's just, what's beautiful. The unexamined life is not worth living. And that is what Socrates died for. He didn't want to stop examining life on his own terms. So that really gets you moving in the right direction. And then we have a lot in here about social theory, politics, and power and spirituality. It's a heady mix of stuff. And you actually sweep through from the beginnings of the set all the way up to the 20th century. So that's the point of these lists, is to kind of give you a scope, an arc, where you're not always reading everything from the particular volume. You're sampling some of this stuff, but you're getting a strong taste of it. And you get the feeling of motion, momentum. Like, if you're just going to read these in order, which was my plan from the beginning, it's going to take you a long time, in most cases, to feel like you're making progress. Whereas these lists, they get you deeper into the set, and you're getting a sense of like the trajectory, which I really like. I recommend that as a good way to read these books. That being said, you can still read them chronologically, which is kind of what I'm doing already, but I jump ahead, and these books get you to jump ahead a bit. All right, with that being said, it's time to preview the second year. So let's talk about what's up. Okay, as we look at this, we've got 21 readings, and we rewind to the Greeks. We start with Homer, and we're going to read the Iliad, the whole thing, not excerpts. So that's challenging. Then Aeschylus, what's known as the Oresteia trilogy, Agamemnon, the Libation Bearers, the Eumenides. This is a trilogy of 3 connected plays. The only trilogy that we have extant in Greek literature, ancient Greek literature, and it's a great set of plays. Then 2 plays, tragedies by Sophocles, 2 of his most famous tragedies, Oedipus the King and Antigone. 2 books, first 2 books from the history of Herodotus, the dialogue Meno by Plato, 2 works by Aristotle on poetics, which is a short treatise on literary theory, and then more selections from Nicomachean Ethics, building on what we did in year 1. And then a math text, Introduction to Arithmetic by Nicomachus. Reading 9 is Lucretius, The Way Things Are, books 1 through 4. Getting into now Roman times, Marcus Aurelius, The Meditations, the whole thing. It's not a long book, but it's the whole thing. Part 1 of Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. So we leapfrog the Middle Ages and we go jump right into Thomas Hobbes. Then Areopagitica by Milton, which is I think it's a long essay. And then a whole bunch of numbers from Pascal's Pensées. A lot of these, I'm sure, are going to be short, but these are kind of like confessional, speculative writing. And then a mathematical work by Pascal called Treatise on the Arithmetical Triangle. Another full novel, Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. It'll be great to revisit that one. I'm so happy to see Candide by Voltaire, which is not in this set behind me, but it's in the 1990 set. It's one of the funniest books I've read. And then A Discourse on the Origin of Inequality. So we go back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau. This is a really famous, very important work by him, one that I've taught before. And then Fundamental Principles of the Metaphysics of Morals by Immanuel Kant, that giant German philosopher. On Liberty by John Stuart Mill, which I think is a relatively short book or essay. Beyond Good and Evil by the bad boy of Western philosophy, Friedrich Nietzsche. And then finally, Alfred North Whitehead's Science and the Modern World, chapters 1 through 6. So it's an ambitious list. And whereas year 1 took me a year and a half to get through, mainly because I was reading other stuff and making other videos, I think year 2 I can move a lot faster, and I'll tell you why. Most of these books I've already read. I'll tell you the ones I haven't read. So these would be first time for me. Introduction to Arithmetic by Nicomachus will be new. Areopagitica by Milton is new. I might have read some of that, but I'm pretty sure I haven't read all of it. So I'll definitely read that. A lot of the Pensées by Pascal, I'm sure I haven't read, although I have read some of them. His treatise on the arithmetical triangle, I haven't read that, so that would be new. Fundamental Principles of the Metaphysics of Morals by Kant will be new. I don't think I've read On Liberty by J.S. Mill. And Science and the Modern World by Whitehead will be new. So that's based, for me, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 6.5 of these readings. Call it, we'll round up to 7. 7 out of the 21 readings will be brand new to me. Everything else there I've read before. So I think when I present these, and the purpose of these videos here on Great Books, Big Ideas, is not to be exhaustive. They're really just introductory videos to get a conversation going. Here's what this book is, a little bit of summary, some discussion topics, and some of my impressions and thoughts about it. It's nothing more than that. It's just to try to inspire you to get into reading these books and conversing with one another about them. So in a lot of these cases, some of the stuff I've actually taught before, so I may not reread them. I can bang these videos out at a faster clip. So yeah, I think that's why I think I can get through year 2 in probably, hopefully, less than a year, and we'll just see how it goes. I'll try to maybe do 2 to 3 of these videos per month on average, amid all the other videos I make for the channel about other topics. I think it's going to be fun. In some cases, I might want to reread something I've read before, especially if it's a different translation. And if time permits, I'll read as much of these again as I can. But my main focus is going to be on the new things. And in the meantime, I can kind of spit out these videos at a faster clip. That is it. And the last thing I'll say is I made a sheet that looks something like this. It's a checklist of all the readings for year 2. And I'm going to offer this to you as a download. I'll put it up on Google Drive, make it available. You can download it. I actually made it into a sort of like a bookmark size thing. So you can print this. It'll be PDF, and you can print it out, and you can cut this to size, and it can be a handy bookmark. So hopefully that would be of use to you. It was fun to make it. I know I like having something to refer to, and this will give you all the readings to follow for year number 2. That's all. Let me know if you're on board to read some or all of these books as we go into the I'll call it a virtual year 2, because it could take longer than a year, it could take less than a year. It's just making progress that's what counts. It's about the journey, not the destination. We're just kind of going at our own pace. It'll be fun. You get a great exposure to the great books through these reading lists. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you're well. Peace out. Happy reading.